It was the summer of 2000, and the heat in Mumbai was almost unbearable. The streets pulsed with the chaos of honking rickshaws, crowded buses, and the constant murmur of millions going about their daily lives. But somewhere among that endless noise, a mystery was beginning to unfold, one that would haunt the city for decades. Brad Sakhote, a 32-year-old Canadian businessman, had been in India for just a few months. He was ambitious, charming, and eager to explore opportunities in Asia. To his friends back home, Brad seemed to be living an adventure soaking in the chaos of Mumbai, learning the culture and immersing himself in the unfamiliar. Yet behind his confident smile, there was something restless. He had a curiosity about places most foreigners would never dare to go. On July 3rd, 2000, Brad left his modest apartment in Mumbai and told a neighbor he was planning a trip. He mentioned nothing about where he was going or why. He just smiled, carrying a small bag, and said he'd be back in a few days. That was the last time anyone in Mumbai would see him alive. For weeks, Brad's friends and business contacts tried to reach him. Phone calls went unanswered, letters went unopened, and it was as if Brad had evaporated into thin air. His disappearance might have gone unnoticed. Just another foreigner who lost himself in the vast chaos of India. But fate had other plans. On August 8th, 2000, in the quiet, remote wilderness of the Vashivali forest near Vasai, a gruesome discovery was made. Locals stumbled upon a partially burned body hidden among the dense undergrowth. The smell of charred flesh lingered in the humid air, and the ground around the body was blackened, as if someone had tried to erase all evidence with fire. But death, leaves, traces, and no flame could completely hide the horror of what had been done. The police were called, and soon investigators crowded the forest floor. At first, it seemed impossible to identify the remains. The body had been severely burned, the face unrecognizable, the features erased by fire. Yet there were small clues bones that told the age, height, and build of the victim. Forensic experts would later confirm what everyone feared. The body belonged to Brad Sakhote, the Canadian man who had mysteriously vanished from Mumbai just weeks earlier. News of the discovery shook both India and Canada. How had Brad ended up in this lonely forest, miles away from the city? Why had someone tried so desperately to burn his body? And perhaps most terrifying of all, who wanted him dead? The police began piecing together Brad's final days. They questioned hotel staff, taxi drivers, neighbors, and anyone who might have crossed his path. Some remembered his bright smile. Others recalled how he always asked unusual questions, wanting to see places tourists normally avoided. Slowly, a picture began to form. But it was a picture smeared with shadows. Brad had been seen in areas of Mumbai known for crime, drugs, and danger. He was curious, maybe too curious. Witnesses said he liked to wander alone, striking up conversations with strangers, sometimes vanishing into the back streets, where even locals hesitated to go. It was as if Brad was drawn to the hidden underbelly of the city, not realizing how deadly that curiosity could be. The Vashivali forest became the centerpiece of the investigation. Who had lured Brad there? Was it robbery, a drug deal gone wrong, or something much darker? The locals whispered of gangs who ruled the area, of strangers disappearing and never being found. To the investigators, one thing was clear. Brad's murder was not random. Someone had planned this. Someone had led him into that forest. Someone had wanted him erased. But the case was only beginning. What started as a mysterious disappearance had now turned into one of Mumbai's most chilling international murder cases. And as police dug deeper, they would uncover a web of lies, betrayal, and brutality that no one could have imagined. The truth of what happened to Brad Sykott was out there, buried beneath layers of fear and silence. And to uncover it, detectives would have to peel back the darkest corners of both Mumbai's streets and the human soul. Brad's story was no longer just about a missing foreigner. It had become a chilling puzzle that would take years to piece together. The discovery of Brad Sykott's charred body in the Vashavali forest sent shockwaves through both Mumbai and Canada. For the Indian police, this was no ordinary case. It was a murder that carried international attention. One that could not be ignored or quietly filed away. Foreign officials demanded answers, and Brad's family pleaded for justice from across the ocean. The pressure was immense. Detective Inspector Ojay Deshmukh, a seasoned officer known for his persistence, was assigned to lead the case. He had seen countless crimes in Mumbai: murders, robberies, and disappearances, but something about Brad's case unsettled him. It wasn't just the brutality of the killing. It was the strange question lingering in every corner of the investigation. Why Brad? The first step was to reconstruct his final movements. Investigators traced Brad's life in Mumbai, digging into his work, his friendships, and his habits. Neighbors described him as friendly but distant, a man who seemed to be constantly on the move. He lived simply, but he was curious, sometimes too curious. He often wandered alone, sometimes disappearing into the crowded slums or the seedy back alleys, asking questions that made locals uneasy. At a small tea stall near his apartment, the owner remembered Brad. He was polite, the man told police, but he asked strange things. He wanted to know where the dangerous places were, where people bought things secretly. I warned him not to go, but he only smiled. The more the police dug, the more they realized Brad had been chasing something hidden in Mumbai's shadows. He wasn't just a tourist exploring culture. He was searching for people and places that most foreigners wouldn't dare approach. A crucial lead came from a taxi driver who recalled dropping Brad near the outskirts of the city in late July. He asked me to take him toward Versailles, the driver reported, but not to the main road. He wanted to go deeper, near the forest. He was meeting someone, but he didn't say who. That testimony shook investigators. Brad had willingly gone toward the very forest where his body would later be found. Whoever he was meeting there might have been the last person to see him. Alive, the theory of robbery seemed too simple. Brad carried little money, and his modest lifestyle in Mumbai showed he wasn't flashy. If it wasn't flash, then what was it? A deal gone wrong? A betrayal? Or something more sinister? Detectives began combing through Brad's phone records, hoping to uncover who he had been in contact with before his disappearance. To their surprise, many of his calls were too unfamiliar numbers burner phones that were difficult to trace. But a few names did emerge. Brad had met several local men, many of them connected to small-time gangs operating in the city. One name stood out: Ramesh Pillai, a known hustler in Mumbai's underworld. He had a history of petty crime smuggling, extortion, drug peddling, and a reputation for luring foreigners into dangerous schemes. Witnesses claimed they had seen Brad with him at least twice in the weeks before he vanished. Police brought Ramesh in for questioning. He was cocky, smiling through the interrogation, denying everything. "Yes, I knew the foreigner," he admitted. "We had drinks. He wanted to see the real Mumbai, not the tourist version. I told him it wasn't safe. but he insisted, "That's all. I don't know what happened after." Detective Deshmak wasn't convinced. Ramesh's alibi was thin, and his body language screamed guilt, but there was no evidence linking him directly to the forest murder. No fingerprints, no witnesses. Nothing solid enough to make an arrest. Meanwhile, Brad's family in Canada was growing desperate. His sister described him as adventurous, but trusting, someone who believed in the goodness of people. Brad always wanted to connect with others, she told reporters. But maybe he trusted the wrong people. The investigation dragged on, filled with unanswered questions. Who had lured Brad into that forest? Was Ramesh just a decoy, or the key to everything? And why had someone tried so hard to burn his body? What secret were they trying to erase? Detective Deshmak knew one thing. For certain, Brad's murder wasn't random. It was a message, hidden in blood and fire. And the deeper he went, the more he realized that uncovering the truth would mean walking straight into Mumbai's darkest shadows. Brad's story was no longer about a curious foreigner. It had become a battle between truth and silence, between justice and fear. And in that battle, the next move would determine whether the killer stayed hidden, was finally brought into the light. Detective Ajay Deshmak sat at his cluttered desk long after the rest of the station had gone quiet. Files lay open, photographs spread across the table, and in the center sat Brad Syket's burned remains captured in grim forensic snapshots. Deshmak had seen countless corpses before, but something about Brad's death gnawed at him. It wasn't just brutality, it was intention. Whoever killed him wanted him erased, not just dead. The autopsy report had offered one strange clue. Beneath the layers of soot and charred flesh, pathologists discovered bruises along Brad's wrists, marks of restraint. This meant he hadn't simply been ambushed in the forest. He had been held, possibly tortured, before being burned. But why? The answer began to take shape when forensic technicians unlocked Brad's laptop. At first glance, it looked ordinary: photos of his family back home in Canada, travel pictures, journal entries. But hidden inside encrypted folders, the team found documents and notes that painted a different picture. Brad had been investigating Mumbai's criminal underworld on his own. The files contained names, addresses, and coded notes about drug operations, extortion rackets, and smuggling routes. Brad wasn't just an aimless travel, he was documenting something. His curiosity had crossed into obsession. Detective Deshmak realized the danger instantly. If Brad had been poking around in the affairs of organized crime, he might have uncovered secrets people would kill to protect. And maybe that was exactly what had happened. One entry in Brad's journal stood out. It mentioned a man only by nickname, the Broker. Brad described him as a shadowy figure, someone who connected gangs with weapons, drugs, and foreign contacts. According to Brad's notes, the Broker had ties stretching from Mumbai to Dubai, even reaching as far as Europe. Brad wrote, "If I can meet him, I'll finally understand the network. But I have to be careful he doesn't forgive mistakes." This was no longer just about a reckless foreigner getting caught in the wrong place. Brad had been circling a dangerous man, a figure with the power to silence anyone who got too close. Police tracked Brad's last known contacts, and again Ramesh Pillai's name surfaced. But there was another name buried in the phone records. Arun Kale, a small-time fixer with connections to smuggling rings. He wasn't as notorious as Ramesh, but he had a reputation for arranging meetings between outsiders and powerful criminals. When police visited Arun's dingy flat in Mumbai, they found it abandoned. Neighbors said he vanished days after. Brad's body was discovered. He left in the middle of the night, one woman whispered. He looked scared, very scared. It was becoming clear that Brad hadn't stumbled blindly into danger. He had been introduced to it. Someone had opened the door for him, and once inside, he never came back. Meanwhile, news of the case was making waves internationally. Canadian media ran headlines. Canadian teacher murdered in India. Pressure mounted on the Mumbai police to find answers quickly. But instead of clarity, the investigation only grew darker. Detective Deshmukh began to see a pattern. Brad had been restrained, interrogated, then burned. This wasn't random violence. It was a warning. Someone wanted to send a message, not just to Brad, but to anyone else who dared follow his path. That night, Deshmukh stood outside the Versailles forest, staring into the endless darkness. The trees whispered with the sound of the wind, and somewhere, far off, a stray dog howled. He imagined Brad, bound and terrified, dragged into this wilderness. He imagined the fire, the smoke curling into the night sky, carrying Brad's last screams with it. The detective clenched his fists. This wasn't just about solving a murder anymore. It was about facing a hidden war in his own city, a war where foreigners were pawns and death was currency. The question was no longer who killed Bradit, was what had he uncovered that made his death necessary. And in chasing that answer, Deshmukh knew he was walking dangerously close to the same fate. Detective Ajay Deshmukh sat alone in his office that night. The buzz of ceiling fans and the distant honk of taxis, the only sounds breaking the silence. On his desk lay Brad Seikert's charred photographs, autopsy notes, and the burned belongings pulled from the Versailles forest. The images haunted him, the empty eye sockets, the twisted remains, the unmistakable signs of restraint on Brad's wrists. Whoever had done this hadn't just wanted Brad dead. They wanted him to disappear. The autopsy revealed something chilling, faint bruises under the burned skin. Brad had been tied up, beaten, and possibly interrogated before the fire consumed him. That detail changed everything. This wasn't a random killing. It was a statement. Forensic experts soon cracked open Brad's laptop. At first, the files seemed harmless emails to his family, lesson plans from his teaching days in Canada, travel notes. But buried deep in encrypted folders was something no one expected. Documents about Mumbai's criminal underworld. Brad had been keeping a journal of names, places, and coded notes. It wasn't just the curiosity of a traveler, this was organized research. He wrote about nightclubs that doubled as drug routes, small-time smugglers with ties to Dubai, and a man known only as the broker. In one entry, Brad's words sent chills down Deshmukh's spine. The broker is the key. He moves between world's gangs, politicians, and businessmen. If I can meet him, I'll finally understand the network. But I have to be careful. People who ask too many questions don't last long here. The more Deshmukh read, the clearer the picture became. Brad hadn't been just another foreigner. On holiday, he had stumbled into something far more dangerous, something that might have signed his death warrant. Tracing Brad's phone records, police once again found the name Ramesh Pillai, the small-time gangster already on their radar. But another figure appeared, to Arun Kale, a fixer notorious for arranging meetings between outsiders and Mumbai's criminal elite. When investigators reached Kale's cramped apartment, they found it abandoned. Neighbors whispered he had fled. 2 nights after Brad's body was discovered, one woman recalled him leaving in the dead of night with a single bag, looking over his shoulder every few seconds. He was scared of something, she said. Brad's story was beginning to unravel into something darker. He had sought answers, maybe even adventure, but instead he had found predators waiting in the shadows. He wasn't a victim of random violence, had been silenced for what he knew. As Canadian headlines screamed, "Teacher burned alive in India," pressure on the Mumbai police intensified. Deshmukh could feel the weight of both governments pressing down, but the truth he was uncovering wasn't one anyone wanted made public. Standing at the edge of the Versailles forest that night, Deshmukh lit a cigarette and stared into the dark abyss. He pictured Brad tied to a tree, begging for his life, then the flames rising to blot out his final screams. The detective exhaled smoke, his chest heavy with anger. This was no longer just about justice for Brad Sakot. This was about exposing the network that had turned Mumbai into a graveyard for anyone who dared to question it. And Deshmukh knew one thing for certain: the deeper he went, the closer he walked to Brad's same fate. Asterisk. The rain had not stopped for days. Mumbai's skyline was drowned in a blanket of mist, as if the city itself wanted to conceal the horrors buried within. In a dimly lit interrogation room, Detective Arjun Malhotra spread out Brad Sakot's recovered belongings across the table: his watch, his wallet, and that single, mysterious, leather-bound journal. The journal was not just a diary. It was a labyrinth of codes, initials, and references to places no ordinary traveler should have known. There were scribbles about deals at the docks, late-night meetings near the oil refineries, and a name that kept repeating like a haunting echo: the broker. Who was the broker? No police database had a record. No underworld files had a matching alias. It was as if the man didn't exist. Yet his shadow stretched across Brad's final months in India. Arjun leaned back, exhaustion painting his face. He knew this wasn't just a case of a foreigner killed in the woods. This was a web, a carefully spun net of secrets, and Brad had walked straight into it. Meanwhile, miles away, in a smoke-filled bar in Navi Mumbai, whispers traveled like poison. Two men sat hunched over a table, speaking in hushed tones. One wore a faded leather jacket, his eyes restless, darting toward the door every few seconds. The other, calmer, slid a folded photograph across the table. It was Brad Sakot's face. He knew too much, the calmer man said in Marathi, his voice like ice. The broker doesn't forgive curiosity. The other man swallowed hard. Then why leave him in the open? Why the forest? The calm man's lips curled into something, between a smile and a threat. The forest swallows secrets better than the sea. But this time, something went wrong. Back at the police headquarters, the autopsy reports arrived. Brad's lungs had water residue, but he hadn't drowned. His ribs were cracked, suggesting he was beaten before death. Yet the strangest discovery was the presence of industrial chemicals in his bloodstream. Chemicals used only in large-scale shipping containers. Detective Arjun stared at the report. Brad hadn't just stumbled into danger. He had been dragged into it. As night fell, Arjun drove to the Vashi docks. The air was thick with salt and diesel fumes, the kind of place where secrets could live forever. He walked past rusting containers, stacked like tombstones, until he found the one mentioned in Brad's journal, container for 7B. The metal doors were chained, but fresh cigarette butts lay scattered nearby. Someone had been here recently. Arjun's flashlight flickered over faint chalk marks on the steel surface symbols, circles, arrows pointing east. A code, a warning, or a signature left behind by the broker's men. Suddenly, he heard the low growl of an engine. A black SUV rolled into the dockyard, headlights cutting through the mist. Arjun ducked behind the containers, his pulse hammering. The SUV stopped, just feet away, and 3 men stepped out, their silhouettes sharp against the fog. One of them carried a crowbar. "Open it," a voice ordered. The chains clanked. The locks snapped, and the doors creaked open. Arjun held his breath. Inside the container, instead of goods or weapons, were dozens of empty barrels reeking of chemical. Same ones found in Brad's body. One of the men lit a cigarette, exhaling smoke into the night. The broker wants this cleaned up by morning. No traces. Arjun's heart sank. This wasn't just about Brad. This was about something far larger. An operation running through the veins of the city itself. Brad had uncovered it, and he had paid the price. But before Arjun could move, the man with the crowbar froze. He tilted his head, listening. "We're not alone," he muttered. The flashlight beam swung across the docks, slicing the darkness. Arjun pressed himself into the shadows, his fingers wrapped tight around his pistol. He could hear his own heartbeat louder than the waves crashing against the pier. The men spread out, searching, their footsteps echoing off the containers. Arjun knew he had seconds to decide: fight, flee, or follow. Somewhere deep in the mist, the shadow of the broker seemed to watch, waiting to see what he would do next. The storm was only just beginning. The next morning, Mumbai looked deceptively ordinary. Street vendors shouted over each other. Rickshaws honked endlessly, and the chaos of daily life masked the rot beneath the city's skin. Detective Arjun Malhotra sat in his office, staring at Brad Seikert's journal again. The word broker glared back at him like a wound that wouldn't heal. He couldn't shake the night at the docks from his mind. The barrels, the chemicals, the men. This was no small smuggling racket. It was an industrial-level operation, and Brad had stumbled into the very heart of it. But why Brad? That question gnawed at Arjun. He ordered his team to dig deeper into Brad's last weeks in Mumbai. By afternoon, an analyst placed a file on his desk. Inside were hotel check-ins, credit card records, and one startling discovery. Brad had been visiting the same upscale cafe in Calabar almost every day, always meeting someone who never paid by card, never signed a name, never left a trace. Surveillance footage was grainy, but the outline was clear. A man in his late 40s, sharp suit, always wearing dark glasses, even indoors. Locals knew him only by a whisper. Mr. Dev. No one knew his real name, but the whispers said he had ties to politicians, the Port Authority, even international traders. Arjun's blood chilled. Could Mr. Dev be the broker? Later that night, Arjun walked into Calabar himself. The cafe bustled with laughter and clinking cups, but behind the chatter lay silence. He chose a corner table, his eyes scanning the crowd, and then he saw him, a man in a dark tailored suit, sipping black coffee with unnerving calm. His gaze swept the room, and for a moment, Arjun felt as if the man had looked straight through him. Their eyes locked. A second too long. Arjun looked away, pretending to study his phone, but his hand brushed his pistol under the table. Something in his gut screamed danger. The man rose, leaving behind a half-smoked cigarette in the ashtray. Arjun saw item unusual. Mark etched on the filter. The same symbol chalked onto the container at the docks. His heart thudded. This wasn't coincidence. This was a message. Before Arjun could follow, 2 men blocked his path, casual yet deliberate. "Enjoy your coffee, sir," one of them murmured, smiling without warmth. Their hands brushed their jackets, hinting at weapons hidden beneath. By the time they moved away, the suited man was gone. Arjun left the cafe, frustration gnawing at him. Outside, the rain had begun again, cold and relentless. He stood under the awning, watching neon lights flicker across the wet pavement. And then, across the street, he spotted a young boy watching him. The boy couldn't have been older than 12, barefoot, clothes torn. He held a small envelope and without a word crossed the street, placing it in Arjun's hand before disappearing into the night. Inside was a single sheet of paper. On it, typed in neat, bold letters, "Stop looking. The broker sees you, Arjun's." Pulse hammered. Whoever this broker was, he wasn't just watching. He was already one step ahead. Somewhere in the shadows of Mumbai, the city's most dangerous man had marked Detective Arjun Malhotra. And unlike Brad Sickett, Arjun knew that the game had only just begun. Asterisk, the message haunted Arjun all night. "Stop looking. The broker sees you." He had been in the force for 15 years. Faced killers, drug lords, extortionists, but never had a case crawled under his skin like this. Whoever the broker was, he wasn't just a man. He was a system, a shadow that spread through the city like rot dot. At dawn, Arjun received a call. His informant Kareem, a petty thief who often traded scraps of intel for cash, was panicking. "Sahab, they are moving something big tonight. B1D warehouses. Foreign trucks, heavy guard. If you want proof, this is it." Arjun knew it was risky, but he couldn't wait. If Brad Sickett had died chasing the broker's trail, then maybe this was the piece he had been searching for. By nightfall, Arjun and two plainclothes officers parked half a kilometer from the Bawandi industrial belt. The warehouses loomed like sleeping beasts, their silhouettes broken by the glow of floodlights through binoculars. Arjun spotted each rows of trucks being loaded with steel containers. Armed guards patrolled the grounds, their movements efficient, rehearsed. This wasn't street-level smuggling. This was an empire. Suddenly, one of the containers slid open. The sight inside froze Arjun's blood. Not drugs, not weapons, but rows of human beings, men and women, chained, gagged, their eyes wide with terror. Human trafficking. Brad hadn't been chasing random corruption. He had uncovered the broker's true business, the buying and selling of lives. Arjun's fists clenched, rage boiling in his veins. But before he could signal his team, a hand landed on his shoulder. He spun around, gun raised only, to find Kareem, his informant, standing there pale and trembling. "Kareem, what the hell are you doing here?" Arjun hissed. The answer came. Too late. A sharp whistle cut through the night. From the shadows, men in black masks swarmed like predators. Within seconds, Arjun's two officers were dragged into the dirt, their mouths gagged. Kareem backed away, stammering, I had no choice, Sahab. They knew I spoke to you." Arjun raised his pistol, but the odds were overwhelming. Dozens of men circled him, weapons drawn. And then, from the warehouse steps, he appeared, the same suited figure from the cafe. Calm, calculated, his cigarette glowing like a red ember in the dark. "Detective Malhotra," the man said smoothly, his voice carrying authority. "You should have stayed in your office. But now, you're in my city." Arjun's mind screamed, "The broker." The man smiled faintly, as if reading his thoughts. "Brad Sickett thought he could expose me too. He was wrong, and now, so are you." The guards seized Arjun's gun, forcing him to his knees. Around him, the chains rattled, the captives watching in silence, their hollow eyes begging for salvation. The broker crouched before Arjun, his perfume sharp, his demeanor chillingly casual. "I admire your courage, detective, but courage without power is suicide." And then, as if mocking him, the broker pressed the still-burning cigarette into Arjun's badge, leaving a dark scar across the metal. "Remember this," the broker whispered. "No one hunts me. I do the hunting." The guards shoved a black hood over Arjun's head. His world went dark, the stench of smoke and iron filling his lungs. Somewhere in the shadows, the broker's laughter echoed a sound that promised the game was far from over.